So, what I was given for this week was talking about God as our Father, and specifically about being fathered and what that looks like, and how the thing of it is that a lot of us, we don't really know what that's like. We don't really know what it is to really be fathered. The truth is that plenty of us, some of us have had good dads, but a lot of us have not. A lot of people have not. A lot of people spend much of their adulthoods trying to work out and find healing from the things that have been done to them by their parents. And whether that's a dad that wasn't there or a dad that was there and was not a good dad. And even so, like we do this thing where we talk about God, we refer to him as the Father, and that's a biblical thing. It's biblical to have him referred to that way. It's how Jesus refers to him over and over and over again. He says, I do nothing that my Father does not tell me to do. Like, he's always referencing his Father. And yet, when we say that, when we go with that idea, it has a certain projection that comes with it. We tend to take our experience of what a father is, and we put that on God. And as a result, we don't really see him for who he is, but rather we expect what we have had. And this robs us of a lot. It makes it really hard for us to see God for himself and who he is. And then we find ourselves struggling with so many things. We have, just for example, God loving us. Well, we expect the same kind of love that we've gotten from our fathers. And a lot of us, for our fathers, maybe our fathers had a lot of expectations. Maybe dad, didn't show love. Maybe he only showed appreciation for when you did something great. Maybe he never showed appreciation. So when you have God and he's saying that he loves you, you're reading that in scriptures, you're hearing that from some pastor or something, and the only experience that you have with a father's love is the kind where it's transactional. If you do something great, if you do something that he approves of, well, then he'll love you. And that's not so with God. That's not how he works. His love transcends. It doesn't revolve around whether or not you're good. It revolves around the fact that you're his. Our first passage will be in Genesis. Oh, okay, that's fine. Let's see here. So, Genesis 1, verse 26. We'll start there. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the sixth day. Let's see here. And then the next passage that we'll look at is Genesis 2. Verse 7. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now we look at these two little chunks of passage and whatnot for two reasons. The first one is where it relates to the very creation of man. You know, look at how God just pours out blessings and pours out providence on mankind, on man and woman. He just takes these ones aside that he created. He doesn't do that with anything else. When you go through the creation narrative, he doesn't pull them aside and say, "Okay, I'm giving you all of this stuff. I'm blessed, and I'm blessing you." But with mankind, he does. What's more is when he looks on at us, he says, "This is very good." He looks on his creation, his children, with pleasure. That doesn't come from what we do, it comes from who we are. We're his kids, his children. And that's enough. That's enough to be loved. And when we look at the Genesis 2:7 one, that statement, the key thing here, the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. That's God's breath that gives us life. It's the very essence of God being poured into our spirit to create something. We're a part of him. And we live in this world that's full of so much chaos and pain. And it's a world that we've made. I mean, we can read through the rest of Genesis and we can find the story about how how we fell. And then that garden had to be pushed aside for something else, a world that we now live in that's full of pain and suffering and sin. And a lot of it's stuff that we perpetuate. We choose it. A lot of people pose the question, if you had been in Adam or Eve's position, would you have done it differently? And we all say, well, of course.
Wouldn't know any better.
Yeah. We say, of course, because we know better now. But if we were in their position, when they didn't know, I don't think so. And yet, this entire book is a story about God trying to take us and bring us back into the same relationship that we had at the beginning, trying to redeem everything that was lost. That's the story in a nutshell. So the thing about this is that that's part of being fathered by God. That's part of him being our dad, as in his own way. And that's the thing with God, is that he's never going to look like any of our dads. And I've heard it, talking about fathers and just relationships with fathers. I've seen relationships with fathers. I mean, I know so many that are bad, and I know some that are so good that they would choose the relationship that they have with their dad over anything that God could offer them, because it's just such a great thing. And all of those fall short of being able to really explain what it's like to have God as a father. He's like a lion protecting his young whenever there's danger. But he's also, at the same time, he can stand back and allow really terrible things to happen, all on the grounds of knowing that he's protecting everybody involved. See, we forget sometimes that all of the people are his kids. And that puts him in really dicey situations where he has to choose. And that's hard. Which one will suffer today? Which one can heal? We don't know. I think of plenty of times in my own life where I have called out to God and wanted him to show up, and he didn't. I can also think of plenty of times in my life where I didn't want him to show up and he did. And we exist in this uncomfortable place where we're being fathered by a being who doesn't share our perspective. He stands so far outside of everything, where he's seeing futures and pasts and everything all at one time. So his perspective ends up being so incredibly different from what we have, whereas we're limited to our experiences, to what's before us, what's causing us pain right now. We don't see that, if we go through this season of suffering, we will grow in all these incredible ways. that it will bring us down to earth, build us up in ways. We only feel crippled and hurt and lost and angry, depressed. We don't feel safe. We just look to God and wonder why He allows us to suffer, not knowing what it's going to look like in 10 years, what it's going to look like in 2. And that's really hard. And that can seem, it can seem really unfair at times. And truth be told, it is unfair at times.
For him too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, the thing of it is as any relationship goes, a relationship with God is complicated. Every relationship is. There's nothing that's ever completely easy. Every husband and wife will struggle with each other. Every boyfriend and girlfriend, every friend with their other friend, they will struggle at times. Because relationships are not simple things. They're not simply a matter of, oh, I like this person back. Great. That's it. That's the end of it.
Nothing's perfect.
Nothing's perfect, but more than that, even if it's super easy, that maybe isn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to be able to develop boundaries with each other, to work things out, to figure each other out. That's the same way with God. Like there's a place for us to learn who He is because we're so detached. We don't automatically know His character just because we read the Bible or because we hear somebody speak. Every person's going to have a different relationship with God. Even when you look at the story of Jonah. Jonah
was Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Jonah ran away from God. He was given a word about Nineveh and about how that city was going to fall into ruin. And then God told him to go there and preach to the people there. And he instead hopped on a ship and tried to run as far away and as fast as he could. And the interesting thing was when the ship was God created a storm. And when the ship was caught in the midst of that storm, Jonah turned to the fishermen who were so terrified. And he was just like, yeah, just throw me overboard. It'll be okay. God's not going to kill me. He's just mad at me. So they threw him overboard. And that was what happened. Jonah, knowing that God was not going to kill him, had these fishermen throw him overboard. And in the midst of it, he was fine. He was right because he understood God. He knew that God was angry at him. He knew that God had caused the storm. But he also knew that God wasn't going to hurt him. Wouldn't let him be hurt. And then he went to Nineveh afterwards.
I think he sort of asked for forgiveness, and that was when God sent the whale. Or something along those lines.
Nope.
No? He just understood.
He knew. He was sleeping during the storm. A lot of people miss these little details. Like when the fishermen came down during the storm that was rocking their boat, Jonah was fast asleep. Wasn't even bothered by it. And then when they woke him up,
Coming back to me.
he was just kind of like, oh yeah, just throw me overboard.
Okay. That was it.
Mm-hmm. It's just this thing, like his relationship with God was one where he knew God intimately. But he also had enough of his own person where he was willing to be like, no, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. And we can easily judge that for being bad, but at the same time, it was real. For better or for worse, it was real. And in the end, the whole story of Jonah sums up in the fact that when he goes to Nineveh, he shares the message with the people there, and half of the city turns back to God. And then he stops and proceeds to go forward saying, I knew, God, I knew you would try to I knew you'd forgive these people. And he didn't want that. And I use the story of Jonah a lot to illustrate what a real relationship with God looks like, where you know God intimately. There are plenty of other examples that are less conflicted, shall we say, but that's a real relationship. Moses had a real relationship with God. David had a real relationship with God. David faltered all over the place. And yet God still pursued him, still loved him, still took care of him. And that's the thing, is a lot of us, we spend a lot of time in this world never really knowing what it's like to have that kind of relationship.
That's true.
A lot of us don't even know that that's possible. I know for myself, I grew up in a church. I grew up in a lot of different churches, and, I was taught to believe that God would never have that kind of relationship with any of us. That was something that we read about. Those people in the Bible, they were special. And it's arrogant of us to think that we should be so special. The people who taught that were wrong. Very wrong. But that's what they taught. So, when I started having God talk to me and things like that, that was a little bit earth-shattering. So, if a real relationship is conflicted, complicated, and at times frustrating, it can be affirming, validating, it can be amazing, it can also be frustrating. But that's what a real relationship looks like. That's part of what it is to be fathered by God, is to have a real relationship. At times, he doesn't give us what we want, and we get mad about that. And sometimes that's not a childish thing. A lot of pastors and so on will say, oh, they'll diminish that and make you feel like you're wrong to be upset that God didn't give you what you wanted. Sometimes what you want is for somebody to stop suffering, or for you to stop suffering. That's not a small thing. That's not childish. Sometimes you want to be free of things that are holding you down, and it seems like you're getting nothing when you pray. That's not small. That's okay. And even when you have times where you talk with God, you find that it's more than okay to be mad at him. He can handle that. The Psalms. A lot of people look at the Psalms as being words from God. In reality, you look at the Psalms of David, for example, and David's just expressing what was on his heart the anger that he had at this situation, the despair that he felt in this situation. To quote one, "My Lord, how long will you hide your face from me? How long will you let my enemies win and torture me?" Like David at times breaks into these points where he talks about just the pain of what's happening around him. And what a lot of people miss with that is like the Psalms. These were songs that were sang in the temple in Jerusalem, because they represented a real relationship. It was open, intimate, clear. And that ultimately is what God seeks with us, more than, it's not about your service as much as your heart. And you see that throughout all the stories in the Bible, all the people that you read about, the kings, the apostles, the prophets, all of them fall short of being who they're supposed to be all the time. Just like we do. And yet they're still loved. They're looked on as heroes to us, examples to us. And that's kind of a blessing that God has provided for us. That love that just stands through everything that we go through, everything that we do, every time that we fall, every time, whether we're the victim, the good guy, the hero, or the bad guy. Whatever the case, and we've all been all of these things at different times. I mean, I know I have more than enough. And yet God still stands by us. And He'll always try to lead us away from the bad things and towards the good things, but, you know, we always have the choice of what we do. And that's the thing. Part of being fathered by God is being allowed to make the decisions that we're going to make. You can choose love. You can choose justice. You can choose mercy. You can choose hatred. You can choose however you want to move forward. And He will walk with you. He might not be happy about it, but He will walk with you. And He will wait until you turn from some of those things. Is He going to be pleased that you choose hatred? Of course not. Our verse in 1 John, when we get to it's literally the opposite of that. But He'll still walk with you, and He'll wait till you get tired of the pain and the agony of a life that revolves around rage and hate and different things like that. So in our 1 John, okay. So 1 John 2, starting in verse 3. We know that we have come to know Him if we keep His commands. Whoever says, "I know Him," but does not do what He commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys His word, love for God is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. Dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. This old command is the message you have heard. Yet I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going, because the darkness has blinded them. I am writing to you, dear children, because your sins have been forgiven on account of his name. I am writing to you, fathers, because you know him, who is from the beginning. I am writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the evil one. I write to you, dear children, because you know the Father. I write to you, fathers, because you know... Wait, why does it repeat that? Anyway. Skipping down to 15. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of the Father, or the will of God, lives forever. This whole thing about the commands of God, as John lays out, and especially about, being known by the Father and being made complete, as it were, it boils down to this point. I'm talking a lot about how, just kind of like the relationship and the frustration and things like that. But the thing about being fathered by God that's really important and to tie in with this, and what is ideal for us to take away, is that where all of this stuff is okay, it's okay to be mad at God, it's okay to have a hard time in relationship with God, there is patience and mercy within all of that. And God has endless amounts of it. The struggle that we have, though, is that in our lives, in the way that we live, we are direct reflections of what we choose to be here. And if we choose to be close to God, we will reflect that. And a lot of people choose to reflect God in the sense that they choose to be Christian, they choose to do as much as they can to look like Christians. But that's not being a Christian. That's not being a follower of God. That's not being one of his children. These are things that happen inside of you, not just things that you act like or look like. And that's the point that John's trying to get to, is this point of okay, sure, you can say that you love God, but if you're hating all these other people, you're not actually loving God. You're not actually being like him. You're not being changed, because because that change happens all on the inside of you. And that does happen as you draw closer to God, as you come to know him. See, the thing about one of the big things with God is that he sits in this place where he understands what we've been talking about relating to like the struggles that we have in relationship to him, he knows that he has this expansive perspective that stands so far outside of anything that we can grasp. He knows that. And because of that, he has infinite patience with us. He's not going to punish you for ignorance. He will teach you, but he's not going to punish you for not knowing. And this is a thing that we oftentimes struggle with, is that he sees that, he knows that, and a lot of us have situations where we've grown up or been taught to expect to be punished for not knowing, for not doing better, for not being better. It's almost like we take it upon ourselves that we're supposed to magically understand things that are outside of our ability to even see. So when it comes to God especially, we look at him and we're just like, that's impossible. How do you expect me to be like that? And that's the thing. It's his to show us. It's his to lead us. That's all part of this. I've known way too many people who look at life and they say, they think that they're going to make themselves good enough to be Christians. So they don't do it. When in reality, we never make ourselves good enough to be Christians. It's in relationship with God that we become good enough. And the truth is that it's never about being good enough, it's just about being there. Another passage, real quick, I believe is Matthew 7. I used to have this memorized, but it is not memorized. Oh, here we are. Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. A lot of people use this passage as sort of like a thing to scare people. They take what Jesus says here and they use it as like a kind of like a leverage to force people into like saying prayers or things like that, being saved. But the point that Jesus was making was not about that. It was about, look, just because you come claiming my name, it doesn't make you one of my kids. It doesn't make you one of my people. A key thing that a lot of people miss is his response. I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Because it's about relationship. Good or bad, it's about relationship. God's meant to be our Father. And even though that looks odd sometimes, it's still what it is. And that's something that the relationship is something that we're led through, something that he perpetuates and we perpetuate. And we have to choose this. Will I come to God? Will I be with God? Will I live with God? Or do I prefer to keep him on a Sunday basis where, you know, when it's church time, then we can have time. I always think about one of my favorite messages from a pastor that I used to know from a church I used to go to. But he talked about how the way that a lot of us compartmentalize our lives. You know, we have our work life, we have our church life, we have our face that we show with our families. And he was kind of making the point of, you know, imagine Jesus coming up to you in the modern day. And imagine that you walk up to him and ask, "Hey Jesus, how is your spiritual life?" And he was just kind of like, how would you think Jesus would even answer that question? How is my spiritual life? Yes? I don't know how to answer that. Because, see, for Jesus, there was no separation. He didn't have a work life. He didn't have a spiritual life. There was no separation between those. It just was his life.
Mm-hmm.
And the point that the guy ultimately ended up making in that message was that our relationship with God is meant to permeate every part of our lives. Because it's all one thing.
Pretty much there's no question you could ask him that he doesn't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
You would be answering your own question by asking.
Yeah.
Like just bringing it out into physical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So within that, it just becomes this thing of like the places where God can meet us in life, they expand well and far beyond what we typically accept or what we expect. And that's important for us to grab a hold of, because a lot of us have a limited view of where God can meet us. He's not like your dad, where he can only be there sometimes, or where, you know, he only wants to be there sometimes, or where he just doesn't want to be there at all. You know, whatever the story is, God does want to be there, and he wants to be able to be part of your life all the time. And wherever he's invited to be, he will be. In the good times, in the bad times, in the joys and the pains, all of it. There's always a place to celebrate, there's always a place to grow, and he will be there right by your side if you want. Now, I say that as somebody who has had more than enough times where I've literally told God, I don't want you to be here right now. I don't want to talk to you. Just as much as I've had plenty of times where I've begged him to be there, to be near. And many more where there's been always an invitation.
Have you felt like the time when you begged that he wasn't there?
Oh,
Was there time?
There were times where I begged and he didn't show up. There were times where I begged and he absolutely was already there. That's one thing, is that we forget sometimes that he's always there.
Right.
Like, sometimes we just don't feel it. It doesn't feel like he's around. We feel abandoned. So, that's its own kind of thing. But that's another thing that's important for us to remember, is that just because you feel like God's not around, it doesn't mean he's not.
Just a
True.
drink that you want? Sorry, I feel like you're thirsty.
Oh, I'm okay. Thank you. But yeah. So yeah, it's important for us to kind of tap into this reality where God is there and wants to be there in everything. And that's for us to be able to have and to hold on to, especially as we question, because insecurity is a normal thing for us, unfortunately. And we always wonder if we're good enough. And the answer is yes, always. Where God is concerned, you're a part of Him. You're His child. And you are always good enough for Him. Even at our worst, where we've committed the worst sins and we feel so ashamed and guilty, He still accepts us with open arms. You never have to be good enough for Him to love you. He will always love you. Always. And that's what I got.